What up, what up? Welcome to Lowkey Weebs. I am Zack.
I'm Marshall.
And Marshall is my brother-in-law. He is here in place of Sean, so hopefully we can give him a warm welcome.
I've heard those are big shoes to fill.
I mean, actually,
Physically
they are.
large,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, Sean's like a size 15 or something. He's a mountain. Today, we are going to be getting into... We're kind of mixing it up, and we're going to go with long life species. I started watching Frieren. It's honestly just a really good show. It got me thinking about long life species, and Marshall is really big into world building. He's like the monster manual guy. And as soon as I saw some of this series, I just was immediately like, Marshall, you need to watch this. And he told me it's really good. So we're going to have some spoilers about it, and we're going to talk about Frieren itself, then we're going to branch off into a couple other long life series and take a look into everything about the theme of long life species. I'm going to talk about whether or not I think it's even a good thing. So, starting off just with Frieren. What Frieren does is it starts at the end of the adventure. So it was already just right from the get-go. It was like a nice change up. Right at the beginning, they had already defeated the Demon Lord. The party decides to branch off.
Which is pretty clever in its own right.
It is. I mean, really, I didn't know what to expect from this show. I saw like TikTok of it. They immediately shattered any expectation I had.
And it's hard for the trailers to capture the tone.
It really is. I mean, the whole tone of it is... I can't think of anything off the top of my head that really carries a tone quite like this.
It feels very reflective in the sense that like Frieren is reflecting on her life and her friendships and the people she's encountered. And so it has like that little bit of a nostalgia whimsy to it. But then there's also, it feels a little sad because everything she's remembering is people that are dead.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the departure of this, you've just had this 10-year journey and just the departure of friends leaving each other. And if you're watching it and you watch the first episode and you're not vibing with it, you're just not gonna.
And it's clever that they pick up where most stories end. I mean, every video game I've ever played that has the 4 heroes fighting the Demon Lord.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah, I mean, you get to the end, you're like, all right, Demon Lord's dead. Cool.
Hooray!
And then Frieren's like, so Frieren picks up right after that, and all the heroes are like, well, I guess we go home. What do you do after spending? And they spent like 15 years.
I think it was
something
a 10-year journey.
10 years, which is pretty impressive and very unique approach to telling a story that I don't think most stories. It tells part of the story that most other narratives ignore.
Yeah, and it's like with media anymore, people think like getting married is just the happy end, or, beating the Demon King is the happy end. And honestly, the thing that got me is they're not bad off, but considering they saved the whole world, they're pretty poor. You think they wouldn't have to pay for anything ever again. Like, people show them a lot of kindness, but they're still just doing odd jobs. And that's not something you would think about after someone like literally saved the world. So there's so many like small details that make this such a fun and unique take. So when they part ways, Frieren, and this is where you get the main theme of it, which is just her long life and how it's affected her and everyone around her. I think at its core, this story it's about how much someone can affect your life and how much someone can change you, even if chronologically they didn't make that big of an impact. Because for her, 10 years is nothing. So it's such a small part of her life, and the amount that those people have completely changed her is huge. So after she parts ways, she's gone for like 50 years, and then she comes back. This is like where they very clearly paint, what it is to be a long life series, because, she sees the hero Himmel, and he's just
human.
Old. Yes, he's human, and he's just ancient, and she just like wasn't expecting it, because for her 50 years, I mean, she just went for a trot. When she gets back, all of her friends are really old, except for the dwarf doesn't look it, but he still kind of is.
Yeah, so their party is Frieren, an elf, 2 humans, and a dwarf, and this is not related to the theme of the episode, but I love the dwarf is basically just a walking beard.
Yeah, like you get him, he's literally just eyes and beard. His name is Eisen.
Yeah.
But he's a really cool design, and you really can't get anything from him, like, as far as, like, his expressions go half the time. Just to go with that, like, the art in it's great. I love Frieren's design. She makes a smug face, and it's one of my favorite things ever. The dopiest face when she wants to give a gift later in the series. I don't know. Everything about, like, the facial expressions in this, or even lack thereof with Eisen, the series is really astounding. I was just really blindsided by this whole series. It's just been so great. So, by the end of the first episode, episode. And so all of this did happen in the first episode. Himmel dies. When they're at the funeral, Frieren's like not even crying, and there's even people there that are like busting her balls about it. But once they finally bury Himmel, she does. She starts losing it because she's realizing that all of her party members she feels know so much about her, and she feels like she didn't know anything about them. It really kind of hits her hard. It just adds to the whole theme of the series because she ends up deciding that she wants to go out and learn more about Himmel while traveling. It's very sweet, and it just really shows how big of an impact these people had on her.
Well, the impact idea, I think, is where the series gets even more interesting because we see that Frieren is, I mean, the whole series is driven by how much these people have impacted her, right? These people that are now gone in her life and she's still there. Almost every episode, she's visiting a town or a place that they as heroes impacted 50 years ago. Already, you're seeing the ripples of those impacts getting weaker, like statues are getting overgrown. People vaguely remember Himmel the hero, and they talk about him as kind of like a legendary figure, not as if he's a real person anymore.
I love how they show the passage of time. And even like from a magic standpoint, I feel like the world building is really good in
It's
this
amazing,
because the clip that actually got me into it, just to show the passage of time and like the impact that everyone has, that especially our heroes, is there is a demon that has been turned to stone and the seal's about to break. He made the deadliest magic ever.
And this magic was like insta-kill magic.
Yes.
At the time.
And
Yeah.
it didn't care about protection spells, anything like that. So when she like sets him free, well, first of all, like before this setup, what really makes it with the backstory here is Frieren has taken on an apprentice, and she teaches the apprentice very basic protection magic. And so when they are fighting this demon is just like floored by the fact that she can prevent it from happening. With the passage of time,
Well, if we think of magic as technology, which is how the world building ends up framing it,
yeah.
the episode setup is compelling for me because they paint the picture of this really badass villain that wreaked havoc on the world, and he's now frozen in stone, but that spell is temporary, so Frieren has to be back in this one place at the right time when he resurrects, so to speak. So they build up how dangerous he is, and you're like, well, it's Frieren and her little apprentice.
Who's just like a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah, who like we just saw in the last episode is just like practicing basic spells, like you said.
Yeah.
So they set up this big fight, and the payoff is that he can't touch either of them. And it's such a nice little twist in the way the tension is built up, because then they go back and they talk about everything that's happened since that battle.
And that like he was an astounding magic, but the second they found out about it, everyone in the world came together to stop it because it was such a powerful spell. And she even like commends him. She says like, you made this amazing magic, but no, we came together as, well, humanity came together as a race just so that they could counteract this spell because it was so deadly. And it was such a fun play on it.
And now it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just completely moot. A 16-year-old girl in a matter of like a couple days can learn a spell that'll completely stop it.
Well, another part of that episode that really sticks out to me, and they do this throughout the series, is they tell like 2 or 3 stories at the same time because of that long life that Frieren has. So not only does she live basically not forever, but she lives thousands of years. So you get this narrator that was there in person when it happened, and then 50 years later she's back. So you get the story of what happened then as well as what's happening at that present moment. So you have this interesting like layered approach. And they even do that with characters that they meet along the way. So like in that same episode, there's this old pervy guy that is following her around, and she eventually remembers that he used to be a little pervy kid.
Yeah, because of the hat he had, right?
Yeah.
And that's what she sees in like most of these towns. And there are so many small details on this that really helps to carry that theme. And the theme is just such a constant in it. And that's something that really drives it home and just drives home. I feel like not a lot of series have really taken the time to show what it means to live that long. Usually it's just elves are like this side thought. It's just like, oh, they're uppity, or, they just kind of how they view humans, sometimes as lesser, sometimes as just, I mean, they don't really take into account what it is to live shorter lives. And the deeper dive in this is really great. It just kind of, I mean, and at this point, like, we can talk about the duality of long life species, because I'd say there's usually like really three ways that are commonly viewed for long life species. It's either, you know, like they deeply care about those who have impacted them, and it's a very lonely life. It's to the point that like they want to isolate because they're so tired of loss. And then you've got series like Omni Man or Invincible, where Omni Man's just like, well, your mother's more like my pet, and that they just hold shorter life species just as lower than them.
Kind of like we would with a dog or a cat.
Exactly. And they don't value our lives as much because they are so much shorter. Then there's also just the take that they kind of just exist. They don't pay them much mind. I feel like Lord of the Rings does this, where they they definitely think less of them, but they still just respect them as sharing the world, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not super into Lord of the Rings. It's been a minute.
I'm reasonably familiar. I definitely don't want to paint myself as a Lord of the Rings expert, because one of the guys that I work with, he is the biggest Minecraft nerd I've ever met in person. He goes to, not Minecraft, one of the biggest Lord of the Rings nerds. I know him because of Minecraft. One of the biggest Lord of the Rings nerds that I've ever met. Like, he goes to Lord of the Rings conventions and things like that.
Oh, that's cool.
I was talking to him about this as well, and like the lives of elves and the lives of Gandalf and how all that stuff kind of interact. There's a lot of lore, but you're right that Lord of the Rings, I feel like, because it's also, we also have to acknowledge Lord of the Rings is one of the first. Like, Lord of the Rings kind of established,
it set the standard.
Yeah, kind of established the fantasy genre that we know today in a lot of ways. But yeah, those elves are kind of like, we live long, humans are kind of gross, but we'll help out every once in a while. And you kind of just like have this weird like standoffishness, whereas in Frieren, you feel her character is very isolated by her age, and she feels, it's almost like ethereal for her, where nothing really is that threatening, nothing is that important or that big of a deal. Like, she gets arrested at one point, and there's spoilers all through this, so I'm sorry, guys.
I'll put notes in the description.
Like she gets arrested in one episode, and she's like, "Oh, it's 5 years."
Yeah.
And she just like really sits down to read a book. Like, she's totally fine with it.
She actually asked the other party members, "Hey, can you bring me some grimoires?" Yeah, and they're like, "Bro, this is 5 years," and she's like, "Yeah, no, it's fine. We'll be good. Just wait for me."
So you have those. You have the Frieren melancholy. You have the standoffish elves, and I think you have exactly what you described, where they live long, but for some reason it doesn't matter. I love the series Goblin Slayer, but the elf in Goblin Slayer, she just casually mentions that her sister's getting married, and she's like 8,000 years old or something like that. Watching those shows concurrently, like going back and forth between Frieren and Goblin Slayer,
just the vast difference in how they approach it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about, so I'm 36. And I feel like I've gotten more reflective as I've gotten older, because, you know, you just like, you have more experience that you look back on, and you weigh that experience against the choices that you're making now. And it's kind of given me a new appreciation for someone that's in their 60s or 70s. They have twice as much of that.
Yeah, right.
That they're using to make a decision.
But if you have 8,000, you'd think it'd show a little more.
Yeah, it has to change you. Like, there's no way you're going to be like a regular human.
I feel like part of that take in Goblin Slayer, it's kind of similar to Lord of the Rings in the sense that they isolate themselves to an extent. So they don't have that experience. They don't have interactions with people who carry the weight of death, even. I think that has a play into it. Is just like, yeah, I've been alive for 1,000 years, but it's been entirely unchanging. Even with the passage of time, it also kind of goes with, and I don't feel like a whole lot of world building gets into this, and it goes with like how fast they mature. You know, I lived for 8,000 years. Well, at like 2,000 years, are you mentally 10? Are you mentally 50? You know, like compared to us. So, I mean, I feel like that has a huge play into it. That's something I really like about, I play Honkai Star Rail, and they've got long life species. And it's something I enjoy about the subreddit there. Speaking of duality, the duality of that subreddit is either like people who are just really want to play the game, want to min-max, horny people, or the deep lore people. And someone got really into it because there's like multiple different long life species. Some that live hundreds of years, some that live thousands, and then some that reincarnate. The one looks really young, she's very childish, but she's like 35, and there's just like this big post explaining, you know, like, this is what she's done in her life. So even though she is young, I think she would be considered an adult at this point, because she's actually really high ranking within, I think it's technically a military standpoint. But also in this game, a 16-year-old has been running an entire library, an entire...
Yeah, of course.
You know, that's just like a human 16-year-old. I mean, she was actually a world-class drummer at the age of 8, so the time frame with that is weird, but I do really enjoy that they do such a deep dive into the overall lore of the game. I like when people have that conversation. Although I will say, just to go with the horny thing, is when people are like, so is she legal? Like, immediately you're a little sus. But this post, it delivered, because like they were just curious about the world building. And I love when people look deeper into world building like this, because it's just really fun to get involved in it.
Well, you touched on one of my biggest pet peeves. If a character has a long life, it doesn't make any sense to me when they present a character that's supposedly been around for centuries that physically looks and acts like a child.
Oh, yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense from a character development standpoint. And like you said, it quickly gets uncomfortable.
Yeah, uncomfortable is the right word for it.
It's a wasted opportunity.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of it. I understand if you want to make your characters so developmentally, that's where their brain is. At a certain point, when it comes down to telling a story, unless you've got a good reason for it, I feel like being around for 100 years, there's just that much time and opportunity for growth. It's exactly like you said. I feel like it comes down to just being a wasted opportunity.
Because a character like Frieren feels so believable. Because we'll never meet a character that's lived thousands of years, right? So it's entirely a thought experiment. You feel like you understand the plight that she's going through because of the experience they give you as a viewer.
Oh, definitely.
Like, that's way more interesting than, I think, a cutesy little...
It's significantly more. They even do go into, I mean, she spent 500 years just by herself isolating after she lost her master. I think that really kind of just shows that she just wasn't wanting to build friendships, wasn't wanting to build anything, because, again, from my perspective, I feel like being a long life species in a world where there's shorter life species, it just sounds kind of shitty to me.
It's definitely, I mean, that's one of those, like, party questions up there with, like, what superpower would you have?
Yeah.
You know, would you take immortality if it was offered to you? Yeah, it is an interesting question, because I feel like death is used to assign value to a lot of parts of life in our world.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? So the idea of a life being precious is partly hinged on the fact that
it ends.
And relatively briefly.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? So... yeah, the idea that suddenly everyone you've ever met and loved is gonna pass away and you have to kind of keep living. I mean, that's a big weight.
That's a huge weight. And that's why, honestly, in most stories that have a sympathetic character, they tend to isolate. I mean, at a certain point, how much loss can you take before it just breaks you, you know? Like, even with animals, I feel like it's hard. But when you just talk about losing a child, losing, you know, a spouse, losing a friend, like, how many people can you lose before you just can't anymore and just can't deal with it? And I just think that's one of my favorite things looking into the long life species, is just how to cope with that, and how to, I mean, you know, at a certain point, some of them just like long for death, but can't quite bring themselves to it.
Well, and if you're Frieren, even if you make a connection, you still feel alone, because who can possibly understand you? Like, can you imagine go to a therapist as an elf? Well, let me walk you through 1,000 years of trauma here. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, well, even just like, let me walk you through the last 200 years of trauma.
Yeah. Like, no other species can grasp what that experience would be like, so it's even more isolating.
Definitely. And something I do like about this series and how well they built Frieren is they really show how warped her sense of passage of time is, and how little she understands the concept of people being okay with dying. Because at one point she meets up with the priest from their group, Hyder. This is where she ends up taking on her apprentice. And when she meets up with him, he's clearly dying. He asks her to take on an apprentice, and she just says, no, she's too young. I'd just be taking her out to die. I just can't do that to someone. So Hyder's like, hey, I got a book. I need you to transcribe it. I think that it will help me live longer. It might have a spell for immortality. And she's like, okay, yeah, it'll take me like 5 years. She's like, really whatever about that. What Hyder was really doing, and it's pretty apparent, that he's just trying to get her to hang around until the apprentice is older, so that Frieren has no excuse to not bring her along. Because he never really wanted longer life. And it's pretty apparent that he's kind of, like, he tells her he hasn't accepted it, but he has. And I think that Frieren just never even stopped to consider that he's already accepted death, and that he didn't need to live longer, and he just duped her.
That's one of the other interesting things about the characters in the series. Like, even though they're dead, we meet so much of them in flashbacks and the encounters that she does have right before they pass away. They all feel very content and accepting and reflective. Like, yeah, it's my time.
And they're all characters that have lived their life. They have accomplished things. They've accepted. It's exactly that. They've accepted their life and they've had a lot of time. I mean, since she's left, they've had 50 years to reflect on things. And they make such great characters. And especially like bouncing back and forth from them in the past. And they do a really good job of showing how much more immature they were and how much they've grown, I feel, in the conversation.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
And that they are still them. That the piece of trash priest, as she calls him something like that drinks and everything, he's still just like that, but he's grown a lot wiser and he's just grown. They do such a good job of showing that contrast of age between young them and dying them.
It's also a kind of continual theme that those other heroes, they put a lot of weight in passing on or like setting up the next generation.
And that
because we have Hyder's apprentice, and then we meet the apprentice of the dwarf later on.
Yeah, Eisen. And that was actually what I was going to get into, is that it's so cool that they do a generational thing, because we do get apprentices of her friends were such good friends. Like, they did get her. They really got her. It's kind of like they are setting her up to travel with other good partners that they have trained or they have known. And getting that generational thing is a really nice touch to the series. It really feels like these characters, even though they're passing on, are still staying with her in their own right. It really just makes the story feel really well, because she's also sharing her adventures with those people and how they've grown, and how teaching the apprentices things that she learned from their mentors. And it's like having a tortoise. It's a pet you pass down over life.
It's that legacy, I think, is another play on thinking about the way life can extend and the way life can ripple. The other heroes, they're not going to live as long as Frieren, but they're living on in
through
these
legacy.
Yeah, through these characters that are now traveling with her. And they reference back a lot, like especially Stark, who the dwarf trained. He talks a lot specifically about like exact techniques and these things from his master and da-da-da-da-da. I think that's an interesting idea to also play upon. Like, the characters are dead, but their memory is still very much alive and affecting the world in a real meaningful way.
Eisen's not dead, but he is retired.
Well,
but everybody else, and then that's exactly it. Fern, the apprentice of the priest, she's learned a lot of him, and they do flashbacks to that, and it is such a great way to show legacy. And I feel like not many people do that either, where you've got legacy showing through the eyes of a long life species. I think she does kind of recognize that what is happening there, and that she is seeing the people she loved passing on and passing that torch, and kind of getting to see the effect they've had on a younger generation. And it's just such a great touch in this series, and I really love it. And especially Stark. I really like Stark. I like to complain about Zenitsu a lot from Demon Slayer. I love Stark because they took the cheesy coward thing and they made it work. If they would have just done that with Zenitsu, I think he would have been a great character. But, with Stark, he is horribly terrified, and they finally convince him to do something. He just, instead of needing to actually fall asleep, he just turns off his brain and just does what he was trained to do. And it pays off. He has just been practicing, and like his body knows the moves, and he ends up fighting a dragon. For a series that has been, I wouldn't say it's like slow moving, but it's not action packed or anything. The action in this scene is fucking sweet. When he takes out the dragon, first of all, like, he's terrified. Frieren says she's gonna kill it. The whole scene, like, he flies up in the air and just like a bullet comes down on the dragon, and he's just freaking out. Like, Frieren, you need to kill it. And she's just like, bro, it's already dead. I think that they did like the cowardice thing really well, because he was very scared, but then he overcame that, and he still has moments where he's very scared, very much a coward, but it's just he's growing over that, and instead of just needing to be completely unconscious, he just lets his training take over.
Well, he also doesn't, especially initially, doesn't understand where his skill level and his power is relative to the rest of the world, right? Because he trained with one of the 4 heroes, and that was his really only source of combat knowledge and combat experience. So if you're training with the legendary dwarf that killed the demon king and saved the world, you probably are going to feel a little differently about where your skills are, because like that guy's always going to stomp you.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to get that sense of winning and progressing over people. So he doesn't, if he puts himself next to the dwarf, he can't see how far he's actually come.
Yeah, the only foe he's ever known is sparring with one of the greatest fighters in the world. He's never sparred with anyone else, not a dragon, not anything else.
And that contrast, I think, is what the series uses the experience of characters in a really interesting contrasting way, because suddenly when we put him against a dragon, now we get the real sense of what his power is like. And that juxtaposition between there's a super powerful character, they don't recognize they're super powerful just because they're surrounded by powerful characters. And I think it's the same thing to go back to the age thing. If you're surrounded by beings that live thousands of years, like if you're an elf and you live with elves, it's just normal. You don't appreciate time the same way as if you surround yourself with people that live a small percentage of your life.
Yeah, definitely. They do, like you said, an awesome job of just showing that.
It's subtle, though. It's subtle.
It is. And I love Stark a lot. I think he's just a great character. He's kind of a himbo. I find him really lovable, which, again, I tend to hate the coward archetype. And it was so fulfilling for me that they overcame that they made that work in a way that it's kind of cute when he is one. Like there's at one point a joke where he says that he's going to go and fight some demons. And, well, it's implied that he's going to go fight some demons. He's just like, I'm going to go find Frieren. But it works. And, everything about this show works. I don't think I've run into a single episode that I second guess in a way that I feel like they step outside of the world building, outside of the characters. Like, at no point does it feel like any scene in this series doesn't add to the story in any way. I really love Frieren. I mean, like, I love it when I'm floored by a series because I don't know what to expect. And I love that it's really thought-provoking because it did get me thinking about long life species, and it did get me thinking about the impact of people in your life, no matter how small of amount it is or how large. I had just finished watching Violet Evergarden, and it's kind of the same concept, except on a much smaller scale. It's the impact of Violet on people that she sees for a day or a week, which, when you compare the two, it's kind of the same time span, relatively speaking. And I just really like shows like that. They really just show how big of an impact others have on your life and the impact you have on them. It's just great seeing characters grow because of that, especially when they do such a good job of showing where that happens. And again, with Frieren, they take it that extra step by showing the impact on the legacies as well. And the impact the legacies have, because long after death, her friends are still impacting and influencing her through new ways. It's just great because somehow they made this show like really somber, but also super uplifting. And it's nice because I like that emotional ride of just like, well, should I be crying or should I be happy?
I mean, almost every episode has some grounding in, oh, I was here before, this is what it was like. That sensation of going back to a place after a significant amount of time has elapsed. That's weird for me if I go back to like my college campus or whatever.
Yeah, no, we all know
it's very surreal.
Honestly, I just get that just driving through a town I haven't been through, like just a place where I used to live, just driving through. I'm like, I don't know if this feels icky or nice.
Thousands of years of that is intense.
Where you even just see a statue and it would be just falling apart instead of just standing there. It's like, if somewhere you used to live got torn down, I feel like is just her day-to-day life. So we're going to step outside the anime box, which we already kind of did. And we're just going to talk about a couple long life species. First, I kind of want to talk about where it's kind of viewed as a negative, and overall as a negative, or there's negative themes to go with it. And then where people are just like, nah, dog, this shit's sweet. My first and favorite series is Spice and Wolf. So Spice and Wolf is about a wolf deity who meets a traveling merchant, and they decide to travel together. It's such a great show. It's really like at its core about the economy, because like that's the whole thing. He's a traveling merchant. He's trying to get her back to her home up north. And you run into a lot of the same themes that Frieren has, because Holo, the wolf deity, has been trapped in the wheat of a town that she said she would help, and she hasn't been able to leave for centuries. That whole travel is her re-experiencing places she's already been to but are completely different, how humanity's changed, how the church has changed because the church is way more impactful now. It often goes into like she has nightmares just about how lonely she is, because first of all, when she got trapped in the wheat, she had first made an agreement with someone in that village, but they have long since died, and everyone she knows has died since then. As she's kind of getting to know Kraft Lawrence, our main character, she is occasionally reaching out to him that she's just so tired of being alone, to the extent that like she in a panic talks about if she is able to have kids, just having a kid to have a kid, so she's just not alone anymore. And she seems pretty okay with the idea of knowing Kraft Lawrence and like losing him, and she's accepted it, but it's also just like a heart-wrenching thing. And that is like one of the first series that I watched that I'm just like, man, like really it's, you know, there's a lot of romance between the two, and I'm just like, this is just a sad story because no matter what, he's gonna die before her. I like that take because I find that take relatable. Losing everyone you love just sounds kind of shitty.
Well, it's also core to the human experience. Dealing with death is something that we all have to grapple with, literally in the sense that we're all going to die.
But everyone
like,
around us.
And like loss is a part of adulthood, and it's a part of navigating our existence. So to like amplify it and magnify it to make it really extreme with an elf, I think helps us answer a lot of those kinds of questions, talking about what do you appreciate in the moment? How do you handle the passage of time?
Even kind of helping like with the coping of it, like looking at someone that doesn't have to deal with it, but what they have to deal with that from the outside perspective.
Yeah.
Kind of, it does give a little clarity in that whole thing. For me, I feel like if I could live forever, that doesn't sound nice, but
I think I might actually take it. That's where I really love fantasy and sci-fi, is when they use the freedom of the setting to explore some really interesting questions.
Especially when it's a story that has you thinking about it long after, or even has you thinking about themes or tones long after, even outside of the story. And I feel like you get really good writing when that does happen. We see the sadness happen a lot as well in The Highlander. He can't have kids. I just watched The Highlander because Marshall
was this
had
your first
mentioned
time watching The Highlander?
It was my first time watching
Wow.
The Highlander. Yeah, I quote it right. There's so many things I just quote regularly that I haven't seen.
It's part of pop culture.
I mean, it's hard not to know there can be only one. But I mean, that's really like a big theme in The Highlander is it's just like he watches his wife die and it's just shitty. But like on the other end of it, there's the guy who is trying to kill him and he's loving it, dude. He's having the best time of his life being immortal, just going around killing people, trying to be there can be only one. And so I guess like in that show specifically, you've got the duality of it, you know?
Well, and that I think that harkens back to, you mentioned Omni Man from Invincible earlier in the episode, and I feel like that villain in Highlander has some of the same things in common, where
humans are just less than.
He feels so far above every other creature. Yeah, I mean, it twists him. It makes him evil.
I mean, in his case specifically, or even Omni Man's, you know, I feel like they're excessively brutal about it and whatnot. But I can't help but wonder, I guess Lord of the Rings elves are closer to that. Like, you know, if I lived that long, it's hard to say whether or not I would have an air of superiority about me.
Oh, I mean, I want to say that I wouldn't, but
Same.
I mean, come on. I mean, is it air of superiority? But how frustrating to have to have all of that knowledge, and then some piddly human is just like, nah.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, you've lived 1,000 years and you just got this ignorant guy being like, no, we should do it this way.
Well, and that even happens in Lord of the Rings. In the Fellowship of the Ring, they're sitting around the one ring. Now I'm not going to remember his name. The lead elf, the head elf, the father. Yeah, I'm sorry, all Lord of the Rings fans. I know you hate me right now. But he was there when they fought Sauron the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And Boromir's like, nah, dude, we should keep the ring and use it for power. And he was... And this elf was there.
He watched it affect man.
Yeah,
he's like, I know what this does to you guys.
Like we're doing this again. Fantastic. How frustrating. Like, no wonder the elves were like, yeah, it's time to leave Middle Earth. Yeah. Because it would burn me out.
Yeah, just sick of everyone else's bullshit. You know, and even the dwarves, I mean, they live longer, but they don't even live nearly as long as the elves, and it's just like having to deal with, because they have beef, don't they, the dwarves and the elves?
Oh, there's all sorts of racial beef.
Yeah, throughout it. I guess I don't blame them for wanting to leave. That's an awesome take that I didn't even think about, and I love that, because it's just like, God, to just have, like, me and my 30s to have like a kid, it's like having like a 12-year-old come up and give you financial advice. Like, what the shit, bro?
Like, thanks, I'm glad you took the time to share this with me.
Thanks for teaching me how the economy works there, buddy. How much do you pay in taxes?
I've been paying taxes for 1,000 years.
It feels like it, doesn't it? But Lord of the Rings also does do the duality there that Arwen,
Eowyn.
Eowyn, and Aragorn.
Yes.
Yeah, so like, and with her, she ends up giving up immortality because she fell in love with the human, which I feel like is a weird take on it. It's a great take. It's really interesting that, love conquers all and everything, but like,
It might be Arwen.
I think it is Arwen.
I'm double checking this now, and you can leave this in because
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You need people to know that you didn't know. You need your Lord of the Rings friends to know that you're a disappointment.
I messed it up. Yeah, I messed it up.
I like people to know.
And
I'm a
I think
disappointment, too.
it's Arwen. Eowyn's the other one, that
The one that gets scary face?
the one that wants to be with Aragorn but can't because Aragorn's with Arwen. Anyways, I think you're trolling me because I complained to you about the Aragorn relationship.
I'm not trolling you because I think it's a great part of the story when you look at a long life species throwing it away. But Marshall here thinks it's a cop out. So why is that?
Because Aragorn is not a real human. He's like some demigod, demi-human that lives for a couple hundred years.
A couple hundred years. How long does an elf live?
Like thousands.
Okay, so thousands. So like,
okay, but if I could double how long my dog lived, I'd be pretty stoked.
I would be too, but if I had to die when my dog died, I wouldn't take that trade.
But she doesn't. She doesn't. She's still looking good. She can go find some other demigod, demi-human to shack up with.
So do you know the details of that, though? Because I really don't. She gave
No,
up her
I don't.
immortality,
I'm
so does
totally
she still live forever? She's just not immortal?
I think she ages slowly.
All right.
Because they show the flashback, well, like the flash forward rather, where like he's
yeah,
like
I do remember that now, and she was there after he passed. I still think it's not a cop-out. I mean, she also left her whole family.
This is true, but she was with them for thousands of years.
Actually,
what else
yeah.
do you have
Oh,
to talk
God,
about?
can you imagine?
But I have a question for you though, and this is more serious. Do you, when you see like a big battle scene and it's elves and humans, do you feel like the death of an elf is more consequential?
Oh, significantly.
Why?
Because I mean, just from the weight of how long they live. And I have gone back and forth on this. And even like looking at like in Frieren, she's worried because she's in jail and then a guard dies and the punishment for killing a guard is death. And I'm like, is that fair though? Should she do a life sentence instead? I mean, I think that comes down to the air of superiority thing at the end of the day. Like, okay, so is a life worth a life? Yes. But like, I don't know. I just feel like when you're losing that much more, it carries more weight.
Well, can I point out then that you just accepted being the dog in that situation?
I never said I wasn't a dog.
Well, I'm just saying, like, 'cause we talked a lot about how these 1,000-year-old species look at short life as being worth less. And I'm gonna say you, because I asked you this question, but I felt the same way. Like when you see the elves roll into Helm's Deep, you're like, well, that elf is making a legit big sacrifice because they could have lived forever, and they're here and they're gonna get stabbed by an Orcai. But then somehow that makes the sacrifices of the humans feel less consequential, which is a weird feeling to grapple with.
It is, but I also feel like that comes down to like the emotional stance, because I feel like for the elves, death isn't normal life, you know? People dying isn't just a normal part of their life, quite like it is with humans. I mean, like, we just die because we're frail, because we don't live very long. And so I think that part of that comes down to just the viewpoint of what our natural life cycle is, that death is just an accepted part of it. And that I feel like for a longer life species, I don't view that as much of a thing. And I'm sure I'm wrong, and I don't have a problem.
But wouldn't life be more precious for the, like, shouldn't we feel worse for the humans that are dying because their short lives got cut even shorter? But instead we're like, oh man, those elves are
those poor elves.
Those elves are really like putting it out there. Or maybe that's just because their armor is cooler and more noticeable.
I think it's actually their beautiful hair.
I mean, that helps.
That I'm just like, oh no, you can't let that hair go. It takes 1,000 years to grow it.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like, I don't like the idea of us being the dogs in this situation, but it's just, I just can't help but put that little more weight, that loss is still just more severe when you look at it from the time standpoint. I mean, I feel like, you know, you kill an elf at 1,000, it's like killing a child. I would be just as upset if a child died. But when it's a grown man, I don't know. It just doesn't impact me as much. And maybe that's just me being wrong. It's still, from a storytelling standpoint, I do feel like in Frieren, if she were to die versus any of the other characters on these travels, I just feel like that would be more impactful. And part of that's because she's the main character, but like also just because it's just when you're losing that much more. But I'm going to think about this a little more because you hit me with that one.
It's weird, right?
It is.
And I've not figured out how to rationalize it because just as like a viewer or a reader, yeah, I immediately think about, oh man, that elf has thousands of years, and that's a shame.
Well, I feel like, to super oversimplify, because of course this is life, not money, but it's just like, if you're taking it at face value, it's just like, okay, well, this person just lost $10,000, but this dude only lost $10.
But now you're back to like, so Omni Man is one of these long-lived species that's evil about it.
But like
he's just using the same logic to be like, you know what?
But
I'm gonna just decimate this planet because.
But see, I'm the middle ground here because I'm not like, hey, kill them. I'm like,
okay.
I'm like, hey, I'm even this is sad, just not quite as sad.
Mm-hmm.
But. That's something good to ponder. And, sometimes it is just that media, you just go with that gut reaction. And I haven't really given it as much thought as to what the weight is. But I think this also just goes with, if I were a long-life species, I think I'd be kind of pompous. So all the better that I'm not. And then just one more note on when it's played off as a good thing. Hit me with some Doctor Who.
Well, the Doctor Who one is interesting. So it's in the Capaldi era of Doctor Who, and Maisie Williams plays this character. So Doctor Who meets her in like feudal Viking era, so way back. And he gives her immortality in the Doctor Who hand-wavy kind of way that those kinds of things happen. And he meets her at various times in her life from then onward, all the way up to the actual end of the universe. She also loves it. She's one of the characters that loves it. She's not evil about it. But what's interesting about how they handle that one is the way memory becomes a big part of it. Because she lives forever, but she's still human. So her human brain still has a human brain capacity, which they're suggesting is capped in some way.
Just because she's taken in as much as she can.
Yeah, so she forgets her past lives, and she writes down all of her experiences. So she has this library full of lives that she's lived that she no longer remembers. So she sits down and reads her own books to go back through the adventures that she's had.
And she likes it?
And she loves it.
Okay. Does she get... So she's with the doctor, right? Does she spend a lot of time with the doctor?
No. It's more like, I met the doctor. He made me immortal because I was a cute little Viking girl. And now we're meeting up at the end of the universe, and I'm sitting here waiting for it to go.
Okay. I feel like from the doctor perspective, that just seems kind of chaotic.
Well, because he's also functionally immortal, right?
Yeah, I did know that. But to just be like, oh, hey, this person in particular. It's like fuck that guy in particular, but the opposite.
It's kind of a, I think trope is the word for it. It's this narrative design that I've seen used several times where the author uses it to like really paint the passage of time because there's two characters that aren't affected by the passage of time to talk and react to it. Okay,
and then showing like the differences in how they... I get that.
The same thing happens in the Sandman series. Sandman, he's an eternal, kind of like a god, but above a god in that universe. I won't get into the lore, but basically kind of the same setup. He meets this dude at a tavern in like medieval era and makes that guy immortal. And then he comes back to meet that guy at the same tavern like every century. It's the same kind of thing. That guy's loving it. But you now have two characters that have experienced all of these things, so they can talk about those experiences directly to more compare and contrast how time is passing and what's happening.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense as a literary tool.
It's clever, yeah.
It is. It really is. So she ended up loving it. She loved every second of it. Did she have much loss? Did she deal with loss? Did she enjoy reading about it?
I think what's interesting about her character is that because she can't remember her past lives, the character development feels different. Because like Frieren's interesting because Frieren remembers.
Yeah, whereas with this character, she is developing relationships and then losing them, and then developing new relationships and then losing them.
And forgetting them.
Yes. Yeah, forgetting them. That's what I meant.
So she's still very human. But it changes the weight of the character. Like the fact that she doesn't remember.
That means she doesn't have thousands of years of growth. And that being said,
interesting twist.
It is. It really is. I like that a lot, honestly. I don't think I've read anything similar to that even remotely. It's either they lose everything, like they have complete amnesia, period, and then it's trying to find all those memories and they remember everything all of a sudden. Like Wolverine, at one point that happens.
It's another wrinkle in that question of like, what would this mean? Because it's a real question as technology advances, right?
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to be immortal anytime soon? Probably not, but life extension continues to develop. And at a certain point, you have to take into account some very new and different ways the world is going to have to work and the way people are going to have to work.
Is 200 years a possibility? Is 500 years a possibility?
Yeah, and suddenly that scope change really twists how you think about reality.
How we think about, life as a whole for our entire species.
Because, like, if I was born 500 years ago, I'd be about hitting my end right now. I'm 36. If I was tribal hunter-gatherer, I would have died way before that just by the nature of the circumstances.
You would actually be completely swole still. Like, you'd just be fucking jacked, rolling around.
I've had 5 knee surgeries.
All right, well.
Yeah, there ain't nothing you're doing for a bum knee if you're hanging outside your tent grilling your meat. Like, it's not.
Survival of the fittest has kind of changed a little.
Yeah, but that used to be 30, like getting to your 30s used to be
a death sentence. Yeah.
And I even think about how it's shifted between myself and my parents, where the way life has skewed, like my parents had kids at 18.
Oh, I know, right?
And like that was
Common.
how life was
normal,
set up. Yeah. I think part of that was like from the boomer generation, and the boomer generation was affected by the Depression era generation, who like really had to scrape and, you know, we got to get this done. We got to make sure that we're protected, blah, 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 blah. And now it's like, I'm 36. I can't imagine having a child.
Yeah. Well, that's, we had ours at 30, and like, even at 27, that would have been a horrible idea. It just, I mean, like, I was a mess.
You feel like a kid.
Yeah. Well,
I still feel like a kid.
Well, let alone like financially, but it's just like at 27, I mean, I was drunk all the time. It was terrible. and just, I was not in a place, and it would have been terrible for my child if we would have had her when we were 26, 25, 27. Mm-hmm. Earlier than that, it would have been a divorce because I wasn't with my current wife, and those relationships, we were not at all right for each other. And it blows my mind.
The weight of a few years.
Exactly. It's huge, except unless you're Frieren. 3 years is nothing. So, all in all, I think it's been really fun talking about long life species. It's been thought-provoking. Marshall definitely brought some stuff up. I need to stop and ponder if I'm a dog and if I see myself as a pet.
You said the elves were better. I'm just saying.
I don't know if I'm going to die on this hill. We'll revisit it at some point.
I mean, I agree that they're better. I just think it's weird that
it's weird that we're just like, yeah, we're the pets. That's okay. So that being said, I just like to do a scale for everything. So I'm going to rate how positive I think being a long life species is. A 1 being all my friends are dead, which is terrible. A 10 being your mother's my pet, which that means you're loving it. You're living it up. So I feel like being a long life species, I'm going to put it at 3. I think I'd be miserable. I'm an emotional guy, sad in general. So I feel like losing my support, I mean, it would just end. I don't think I can handle. I am still upset about my dog and my rabbit that I had to get rid of. So like losing a wife or a child, I couldn't get up from that. And then I'd end up living a lonely existence. And that's not for me. What do you think, Marshall?
Well, I just want to throw out there in case people haven't seen Invincible, the Your Mother's My Pet rating. Yeah. Omni Man says that about his human wife. And he's saying that to his half-human son. And the way the series handles that part is also really interesting, so I won't spoil that. But for me, my problem is I'm really curious. Like, my curiosity
would win.
Yeah. And also, this is a weird comparison, but when they started talking about colonizing Mars, I was like, I will sign up now.
Oh, geez, that sounds so miserable, though.
In a heartbeat, man. Right away. I would get on that spaceship today.
So,
because like just to have that experience and go someplace and do something that is so unique that other people have not gotten to do.
I mean, I definitely get wanting to be a pioneer.
That part of history?
I like the part of history where I sit on my ass and do podcasts, but I do respect your opinion. So where are you at on the 1 to 10?
I mean, I might be an 8 or a 9.
An 8 or a 9? Hey, hell yeah.
Minus the part where I'm objectifying
that was
the
just
woman
for
I
jokes'
supposedly
sakes,
love.
But
yeah.
like, so you see it as a very positive thing.
I mean,
that you would pursue it.
I would pursue it. I'm a pretty melancholy person, so I would definitely be like really Edgar Allan Poe about the whole scenario. Like, I'm not saying that I would be like living it up,
just writing poems every day.
I would I'd be sad, living in my darkness. But at the same time, I could watch all the anime that I ever wanted.
I mean, that is something.
There you go.
I mean, like, that is the one currency. I mean, no, I'm poor too, but like the one currency that I cannot seem to find is time. So I guess you'd have a ton of that. That being said, thanks everyone for coming out. Thank you, Marshall, for coming. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, let's keep it low-key, Weebs.